Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to talk about some tips for writing style when writing instructions. When we write instructions, we really want to think carefully about our word choice, and we want to choose short, everyday words. So rather than saying something like, never utilize equipment to inflict pain on an animal, we can say that much simpler with simpler words, saying never use equipment to hurt an animal. Inflict pain on, change that to hurt. Utilize, change that to use. When we're looking at acronyms and abbreviations, we want to make sure we don't overuse them. I just read a book that was difficult for me to read for a couple of reasons. One of them was because acronyms were overused. We need to make sure that we spell out what acronyms and abbreviations mean the first time we use them, and then for abbreviations specifically, only use commonly recognized abbreviations that our audience will understand. When thinking about sentence structure, we want to place the main idea in what we might think of as the sentence core, and I'll talk about that in just a little more detail in just a moment. We want to make sure that we're using parallel structure for parallel items. We want to place the subject and the verb near the beginning of the sentence, and when we can, we want to use human actors when possible. So let's look at some of these examples. When talking about placing the main idea of a sentence in the sentence core, we want to arrange sentences so that the main idea comes as close to the beginning of the sentence as possible. So instead of saying, if you can outthink an animal instead of trying to outmuscle it, capture will be easier. Capture, this idea of easy capture is what we want our reader to focus on. So we want to move that to the front of the sentence. So we might say, you can capture an animal easily if you outthink it rather than outmuscle it. Similarly, instead of saying, it is important for animal control officers to know that all animals can feel pain, we can get that main idea of this idea of animals feeling pain and get to it much quicker by just saying all animals can feel pain. Using parallel structure for parallel items, this is especially important when we're looking at items in lists. So if we're talking about qualities of hard ropes, in this top example, we have manila, sisal, or other fibrous materials, 30 to 60 feet, strong and flexible, can cause rope burns. Now, I was okay with this until that last bullet point. Each of these were either nouns or adjectives that describe hard ropes until that last bullet point, which is this clause, can cause rope burns. So instead, what we probably need to do is keep those first three items in a bullet list, but then include that last bullet as its own thing. It looks like it's a caution to me. So we might say, caution, ropes can cause or can burn humans and animals. We want to place the subject and the verb near the beginning of the sentence. So rather than saying, to do a better job of capturing animals, you need to understand animal behavior, we can say, you need to understand animal behavior to effectively capture. Instead of saying one method of using a catch pole is to have the loop enclose both the head, blah, 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 we can say enclose the animal's head and forelimbs. So we're using that imperative voice there. And then using human actors when possible. Instead of saying there are many things to consider before relocating and releasing wildlife, we want to address the person we're talking to. You should consider many things before releasing a wild animal. These sentences that start with there are or it is, sometimes we call those expletive constructions, and almost always they result in writing that's not very concise. We want to use transitions and subordinations appropriately. Transitions show relationships between ideas, and subordinations show kind of a hierarchy of ideas. So in this example with the frowny face on it, we have a couple of sentences. There will be times that you will have to set live traps to capture a wild animal. Think before acting and always consider your safety. Okay, those two sentences make sense, but how are they related? In the revised example, we showed that relationship by including the word however. It says you may have to use a trap to catch a wild animal. However, think before acting to protect yourself and private property. This shows that this need to be, aware and to think before we actually do something is part of this act of having to trap and catch a wild animal. We want to avoid nominalizations whenever we can. Now, nominalizations are words that we've turned into nouns from some other part of speech, usually verbs. So in this first example, most animals will try and run and avoid a confrontation instead of fighting when you approach them. We have that word confrontation, and we know that it comes from, or it's related to, the word confront. It's just the noun form of the verb confront. And it's often a good idea to look for these nominalizations. Many of them end in tion or ity or other endings like that, and turn them back into verbs. So you might revise this to say, most animals will run rather than confront you when you approach. It's much plainer, much simpler to read. We want to prefer active verbs. So instead of saying bite sticks may be used, we want to say use bite sticks. Now remember, passive voice is created when we have a form of the verb be and a past participle verb. Those are verbs that usually end in ed or en. So in the first example, we have be used. We've changed that to this imperative form of the verb use, and we've turned that sentence into active voice as a result. I just mentioned imperative mood. We want to be sure to use it in our instructions, especially when we're looking at numbered lists. So instead of saying you need to act calmly and quietly, do not move quickly, never attempt to run, do not stare. Now this paragraph has a number of imperative sentences. Do not move quickly, never attempt to run, and do not stare are all imperative sentences, but they're mixed in this paragraph form, or this paragraph organization, with sentences that are not in imperative mood. So if we're trying to give someone instructions, we can put these in a numbered list, remove much of the fluff, and just tell them what to do. Move slowly, do not run, do not stare in the dog's eyes. We want to use strong verbs. I mentioned this concept of expletives earlier, these sentences that start with there are, or there will be, or it is. These often result in weaker sentences and can be revised. So instead of saying there will be times that you will have to set live traps to capture a wild animal, you can revise this to be more concise and stronger to just say you may have to set traps. So as you're writing, look for these sentences that you write that start with there are or it is, and see if you can revise them. We need to think about gender inclusiveness when we're doing any kind of writing, any kind of technical writing certainly. In this example, it says, it is interesting to note that female animal control officers may be more successful than male animal control officers in capturing unconfined dogs. Soft, soothing tones along with correct body movements can actually reduce the animal's public, social, or personal spaces. Now this assumes that women in general have softer, soothing, more soothing voices than men. And while that may be true for some women, it's not true for all women. And statements like this that make these kinds of assumptions could either just be removed, or if we have some specific data, some specific finding from some study or some story that we want to share, then we can include those details so that people know that we're not just saying all females are have softer, more soothing voices than all males. We want to avoid that kind of generalization. The last thing I'll mention in this video is just some tips about capitalization. This is one of the trickiest parts of writing, I think. In the editing classes I teach, these rules can be kind of tricky. So just to give you some basic guidelines, you want to capitalize proper nouns, names of people, places, and specific things. You don't want to capitalize descriptive nouns. You don't want to capitalize titles unless they're followed by names. So you would say the doctor, lowercase, but Dr. Smith, uppercase. Capitalize words like chapter, figure, section when they're followed by a number. So if you're saying see figure 1, you capitalize the word figure. And then if you're in doubt, just opt for lowercasing. This might feel opposite of what you want to do, but it's a good rule of thumb not to overcapitalize words. So I hope this helps. Let me know if you have questions.